Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the University of Richmond's Founders Week 2002. The lecture this evening will be presented, as you perhaps understand and know, by Dr. Harvey Cox of Harvard University. Our theme this year is Christianity and Pluralism. No one can understand humankind without understanding the faiths of humanity, sometimes naive, sometimes penetratingly noble, sometimes crude, sometimes subtle, sometimes cruel, sometimes suffused by an overpowering and sacrificial gentleness and love, sometimes world-affirming, sometimes world-negating, sometimes inward-looking, sometimes universalistic and event and missionary-minded, sometimes shallow and quite often profound. Religion has permeated human life, you and I know well, since early and obscure times. So we gather tonight, 2002, early in the year, to continue the search for understanding, ultimately for peace on this planet. David and Terry Heilman Sylvester have made this lectureship over the years, for 16 years, possible. They're graduates of the E. Claiborne Robbins School of Business in 1977 and 1978, respectively. And for this, over this 16-year period, they established an endowment that would permit us in the chaplaincy to attract nationally and internationally recognized men and women, to be advocates of a cause, a particular position, belief, conviction, and to challenge us to address moral and spiritual issues at the heart of this community. So we are especially grateful tonight for David and Terry Heilman Sylvester. Following Dr. Cox's presentation, we have three panelists from our university, professors, whom I will present to you at the close of Dr. Cox's lecture. There are books, perhaps you have seen at in the foyer of the chapel, maybe some left for you to purchase, and I think Professor Hicks will be mentioning the titles of those books momentarily. Welcome, we're glad you're here. I've asked Professor Hicks, Douglas Hicks, in the School of Leadership Studies on the campus, Professor of Leadership Studies in Religion, to be the one who introduces Harvey Cox. Dr. Hicks is a graduate of Davidson College, Duke University, and an MA and PhD from Harvard. In 1994-95 school session, Douglas Hicks was Harvey Cox's teaching fellow. So apparently Dr. Hicks knows Dr. Cox very well, or to hear him say it, he knows him extremely well. It is a special privilege to present to you our professor, Douglas Hicks.
Good evening. It's a real honor to introduce Dr. Harvey Cox. His 1965 book brought him critical acclaim and the lifelong label, whatever else he has written and said since, that he is the author of The Secular City. He has helped shape the cutting edge of national and international discussions of religion and society for 4 decades. The well-respected theological faculty of Marburg, Germany, named The Secular City as one of the 2 most decisive books in Protestant theology in the entire 20th century. I point out that the other recipient of that award was the late Karl Barth for his commentary on Romans. Karl Barth is respectable theological company indeed. Dr. Cox has written some 14 other books, including definitive texts in liberation theology, Pentecostalism around the world, and religious pluralism. This latter topic has occupied much of his attention including, for example, his book called Many Mansions, A Christian's Encounters with Other Faiths, and his newest book, Common Prayers, Faith, Family, and a Christian's Journey Through the Jewish Year. This latest book reflects upon Dr. Cox's own experiences in and through his marriage to Dr. Nina Tumarkin. The Boston Globe recently ran a story about their marriage with this headline, Leap of Faith, a prominent Christian and a devoted Jew share each other's traditions to build a strong family. I see that Harvey Cox is a prominent Christian. I don't know if they judged whether you were a devoted Christian or not, but we'll give you credit for that as well. The picture also includes their 15-year-old son, Nicholas. Let me say that as a graduate student who benefited immensely from working with him, I would be want not to say how respected Harvey Cox is by his students, undergraduates and graduates alike. For years, he taught the most popular course at Harvard, Jesus and the Moral Life, which regularly drew over 600 students. He now team teaches a course called Thinking About Thinking with two other professors whom you may have heard of, Alan Dershowitz and Stephen Jay Gould. I only wish that I could sit in on those lectures and debates now. He has taught generations of students to make sense of religion, diverse religions, and the moral challenges of contemporary society. He has helped me and literally hundreds of other students to expand our vision of a just society and a more humane world. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Harvey Cox to the University of Richmond.
Thank you so much, Doug, and also David. It's a wonderful delight to be here at the University of Richmond for Founders Day, to get away from the gloomy, cold weather that I have to live with into the gorgeous weather you have, at least today. I don't know what it was before, and to be here for this occasion. I'm looking forward very much to hearing from the panel after I have made my remarks, and also the possibility, I think, that you will be invited to enter into this discussion too. That's something I anticipate keenly. The biggest surprise of the late 20th century and the beginning of the 21st is, although many acute observers had decided that religion was declining, that its strength and influence were waning, and that by now it would have become quite marginated, the big surprise, of course, is that this did not happen. Instead, we find all around the world what has been described as a resurgence of religious traditions, some of them venerable old traditions, some of them newer religious movements. Nonetheless, those who predicted it were wrong for reasons that I may allude to in a moment here, but there it is. It's a fact of life in our midst and documented all around the world. Instead of retreating into small enclaves or out onto the margin, where some cultural observers and scholars of religion said it would retreat to, never again to be a shaping influence in culture and political institutions and public life, religion, in fact, has taken precisely has moved in the other direction. I have to say right away, if you've been studying the history of religion and religions as long as I have, this is good news, and it's also bad news. When religion becomes more vital and more influential, the good parts of religion strengthen and deepen our sense of common humanity with each other. They stimulate compassion, brotherhood, sisterhood. And yet we all know that religions also seem to have a way of stimulating bigotry, hatred, xenophobia, suspicion. As Brian Hare, our recent dean at the Divinity School at Harvard, used to say, we have to recognize the fact that not only are there people who are willing to die for the faith, there are also people who are willing to kill for the faith. Good news and bad news. Let me just register a few of these good news and bad news items which flood in upon us. Who would have predicted 10 or 20 years ago that it is a meditation movement in Japan, the Falun Gong, which terrifies the Chinese communist regime? Not a sworn revolutionary movement of bomb throwers, but people who quietly sit and meditate or do exercises that relate mind to body. Who might have foreseen the Islamic Renaissance 40 or 50 years ago, all around the world, such that we now have, for example, a full-scale program in Islamic law being taught at our law school? I doubt if anyone would have foreseen that. Who might have foreseen the enormous burgeoning growth of the Pentecostal movement, about which I actually wrote a book called Fire from Heaven a few years ago, so that now the Pentecostal Christianity is the fastest growing branch of Christianity, growing especially in those parts of the world, South America, Asia, and Africa, where the demographic population growth is largest, so that within another 30 or 40 years, it is predicted there will be more Pentecostals than all the other non-Catholic Christians put together. 2 years ago, I visited the largest single Christian church congregation in the world. It's called the Yoido Full Gospel Church. It's in Seoul, Korea. They have 400,000 members. So they told me. And it certainly looked that way to me. 7 or 8 services a day with buses coming and going in a huge church edifice that reminded me more of Fenway Park than any church building I had been in. Who would have predicted the growth and coming to power of the Taliban and the trouble they have caused their fellow Muslims and the rest of us? Who would have predicted the enormous vitality in the Jewish religious tradition and the appeal of modern orthodoxy when everyone thought it was moving in the direction of reform Judaism? Modern orthodoxy. There is also the bad news, however. In power today in India is a party called the Bharata Janata, a Hindu nationalist party whose supporters some years ago smashed to smithereens a mosque. Some of you remember the attack on the on the Tokyo subway system of a religious movement called al-Shinrikyo in Japan. The attack using poison gas that killed many people and made hundreds sick. Good news and bad news. Now this comes as a great shock, I think, to those of us who were trained in theology maybe 40 or more years ago, in which the entire agenda of theological education was how do we speak persuasively about the Christian message to a secularizing, rationalizing world? How do we speak to what they used to call modern man, who was this rational, secular creature? I would submit that this is no longer the issue, and that what we have instead is a global situation of indeed pluralism, rampant pluralism, not the death of God, which was once also predicted some 20 or 30 years ago, but what might be called the rebirth of the gods, and indeed the goddesses. So we have to sort out the meaning of our own faith, and I have to do that as a Christian, in the midst of a vigorous and renewed set of religious movements all around the world, a plethora of religious movements all around the world. And I suppose the reason I've been drawn into this discussion is that I am really still not satisfied with any of the theological answers given in most Christian theology to this question of pluralism that I've been asked to address this evening. I am not at all satisfied with a kind of Christian triumphalism which says we and only we are God's elect who will finally arrive in the promised land. I am equally dissatisfied with a kind of wimpy relativism that says we're all going the same place, we simply call it by different names. You've heard this many times over. When I sit on an airplane and tell people, when they ask me, I don't volunteer the information, what I do for a living, person after person will say, oh, well, the religions really underneath all teach the same thing, don't they? And I say, no, they don't. If they did, it would be pretty dull and not particularly interesting. They don't teach the same thing. There are overlapping elements of commonality, but there are real differences among the religious traditions of the world. Start with those traditions stemming from the Hebrew tradition, Christianity and Islam, who have a strong sense of the reality of a personal God, and contrast that, for example, with most kinds of Buddhism, where such a concept simply is not part of the picture. Just start with that. No, there are many, many differences. I want to circle back, however, at the moment and talk about the good news and the bad news, because I'm convinced that one of the problems we now face in the emerging dialogue among religious traditions, for which I am deeply grateful and one in which I participate whenever I can, is that we are often reluctant to point out, both in our own traditions and in the traditions with whom we are speaking, the fact that each of the traditions has what might be called a shadow side. Each of the major traditions, especially the three that I just mentioned, the so-called Abrahamic traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, have, as part of their history, elements which many good Jews, Christians, and Muslims would just as soon forget and would prefer not to talk about. So there's a lot of kind of disallowing for the behavior which seems to be stimulated or inspired by our own religious tradition, by mine or by yours, and saying that's not really what it's about. They've got it wrong. They've got it wrong. However, those people who seem to have gotten it wrong tell us that we've gotten it wrong. I don't believe that simply reading out those who have a different interpretation of my tradition or of your tradition is the way to go. I think we need much more candor about the complexity, the many-sidedness of each of these traditions, about the willing to die and the willing to kill part. And until we move into an age of candor about this, confessional candor, mutual help in facing these elements of each of our traditions, I don't think we can make much progress in the interfaith dialogue. It'll be simply too nice, too tolerant, too Tea Party-ish, and we won't get very far indeed. Now, what I want to do at this point is to provide a short demonstration of the bad news, and then go on to a few remarks about the good news. Some of my graduate students recently made a video at my request to illustrate this, and I hereby notify you in advance that what you're about to see on the screen will not be pleasant. There'll be three people whose conversations you will overhear, or whose interviews you will hear, and whose faces you will see. One from the Islamic tradition, one from the Christian tradition, and one from the Jewish tradition. All three of whom believe that these are people who are willing to kill for the faith. First, of course, is the famous Osama bin Laden, about which we hear a lot nowadays. And this is an excerpt from the equally famous tape, which was allegedly recovered in Afghanistan, where he is talking with some of his associates about how pleased he was with the damage done in the destruction and the lives lost in the destruction of the World Trade Center, and phrases it in explicitly religious language. The second person you'll meet here is a gentleman named Paul Hill, a serious and deeply committed Christian who, in fact, killed a doctor who, among other things, performed abortions, and says, as plainly as can be said, he did this because he believed the Lord wanted him to do it, and was supported in doing it by his immediate friends. The third you'll see is a man named Yigdal Amir, who some years back assassinated Prime Minister Rabin of Israel because he believed that his teachers, his rabbis, his tradition, were instructing him to kill Rabin, who was about to make a peace arrangement with the Palestinians, thereby giving back some land to the Palestinian people, and thereby, Amir thought, endangering not only the lives, but the claim to that land that he believed his people had. So what you're going to see now is the bad news. It won't be the end of the evening, but I'm doing this because I think together we have to face the bad news before we can talk about the other possibilities. Are we ready?
kill a whole lot of people.
Investigators say evidence places Rudolph belonging. They aren't sure whether others may be involved.
The underground is enormous, evanescent, autonomous eruption of rage in their defense of the unfortunate.
I hate to quote Chairman Mao, but he was right. Kill one, spare 1,000.
Dr. Johnson and clinic volunteer Jim Barrett lay dead. Police arrested Paul Adele a half block away.
You have actually been in marking God's children in training.
The next step is to arm ourselves on a militia, a real militia, that has the power to resist the federal government.
A prominent local doctor who performed abortions was gunned down inside his home.
It was the 5th such sniper attack in 4 years. Anybody who raises a weapon up against these people who are slaughtering these babies, before God and the entire world, right now I say, you are doing God's own work.
Go to the Middle East now, and the confessed killer of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin says he acted on behalf of all Jewish people. In his second court appearance, Yigal Amir called Rabin an illegal Jewish leader. Amir also said he acted alone, claimed to be a political prisoner. In Israel, the investigation continues into the murder of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, as police plan to question 3 prominent rabbis about their ties to Yigal Amir, religious extremists who confessed to the murder. While many religious Jews are wondering if their teaching played a role in the assassination, CNN Gerald Campbell has that story.
Parts of the world of Jewish learning have been plunged into a crisis described as the most serious for Judaism in centuries. A world of conviction, of certitude, faces gnawing down, where the rabbis, leading teachers of Jewish law, are directly or indirectly responsible for this. This morning, the young religious student who gunned down Israel's Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin for possibly blessing his action.
I never heard the speaking problem to Berlin. I was aware to dangerous words can be like bullets. And I used to speak about the dangers of violence.
Some rabbis, however, do point an accusing finger.
We've now created an image that religion, loyalty to the religion, creates violence. Loyalty to the religion creates a person who in some way doesn't have a moral sense. This type of dehumanization is going to kill the society.
Others are entirely unmoved.
We succeed in producing young men and women of the highest caliber.
The confessed assassin Yigal Amir, the issue was simple. Saving sacred Jewish land from being handed to the enemy is more important than the commandment, thou shalt not kill. For the rabbis, the problem is broader. All the young Israelis' questions about complicity in the murder are religious. Students at a leading university from the mainstream of the national religious community. They also helped fight the ardent battles of the Jewish settlement movement in the West Bank. For a decade and a half, the right-wing Israeli government, the ideology of the settlers and their rabbis of a God-given land of Israel was viewed as highly moral, elitist. Rabin's Labour Party election triumph in 1992 and the subsequent peace strategy with the Palestinians threatened to undermine their world. The rhetoric became more and more virulent. Some rabbis talked openly about how to delegitimize the government. No rabbi has publicly admitted issuing a ruling that would justify killing a fellow Jew. But when one settler rabbi charged his colleague had branded Rabin a Moser, a turncoat willing to hand things over to the enemy, he needed special police protection. The accusation is vigorously denied by one rabbi who he named.
To ascribe to me any such thing as this slander is absolutely unimaginable.
Other rabbis now acknowledge they were debating whether Rabin could be judged in terms of an ancient law, sin or death. expect the judgment of the potential killer. That falls on the righteous man to kill the would-be killer before he can commit his crime.
Now, I realize that's very hard to take all in one dose. So I think I'd like to take just a few moments, if I could here, to have you just turn to your neighbor and just say to your neighbor what was going through your mind as you watched this. I'll be back in 3 or 4 minutes, but try to say something, what it was that you were feeling or thinking when you watched this. In a different way in a few moments. After seeing this graphic representation of how religion can in some sense be linked, in some ways can be linked to hatred and violence, any one of us who is loyal to one of these traditions, who's been nurtured by one of them, wants immediately to say, no, he got it wrong. That has nothing to do with Judaism. That has nothing to do with Christianity. That has nothing to do with Islam. And I understand that. That's exactly what I want to say about Paul Hill. However, I realize at the same time that those who hold that position, the one that I'm condemning, can say of me, you've got it wrong. No, the Lord spoke to me. The Torah taught me. Or whatever. So I don't think we get anywhere by trying to read out of our tradition those who interpret it differently from us. I think that leads nowhere. It leads in a vicious circle. We have to try to do something else. Now what I'm saying here, I suppose, is that in an age of interfaith dialogue, one of the most important things for us to be doing is intrafaith dialogue. Is talking with and trying to understand those people who share our tradition, who read it in a very different way, who read it in ways that make us, inspire in us dread and fear and humiliation. How do we establish and nurture contact with those people? How do you, most of us here, I think many of us here are Christians, how do you talk to a Paul Hill? How do you try to make him understand? How do you listen to where he's coming from? Why he thinks the Lord told him to murder this doctor who performs abortions. We saw some of the people who had advised him and taught him, all of whom had as strong a view. Think about that for a moment, and I'm certainly hoping that the panel will respond to this as well. I want to make 1 or 2 other points, however, before I invite the panel to join me. And the question that comes to my mind, I guess, is if this is the bad news, what in the world is the good news? Can there be any good news after this terrible depiction of the worst parts of our traditions? Well, I think so. If I didn't think so, I would not be a religious person. I would not be a Christian. If Paul Hill represented all there is in Christianity, I would resign this evening. But thank God he doesn't. But I do not disclaim him as being part of my tradition. Again, I don't think that gets us anywhere. I think we can't follow that route. Why do you think it is that after what appeared to many to be a century of decline and marginalization, maybe it wasn't, religious resurgence is now evident all around the world? In Asia, in Africa, North America, South America. One of the things I'm studying most carefully now is the vigorous growth of Christian movements in mainland China, growing there without very much encouragement or no encouragement from outside missionaries. Why did this happen? I'm not sure why it happened, but I think I have a hunch. And the hunch came to me very clearly some years ago, about 8 years ago, indeed, when Václav Havel, the president of Czechoslovakia, spoke to the commencement exercises at my university. You may recall that Václav Havel was a playwright and intellectual, became the leader of the resistance movement to the communist regime in Czechoslovakia, was imprisoned, and as the big change came in Czechoslovakia, he was released from prison, and within 6 months after being released from prison, he was the president of Czechoslovakia. A very, very remarkable man, and an insightful and thoughtful commentator on where we are now. One of the things Václav Havel said that I'll never forget, it wasn't in his address, it was in a luncheon that was organized with him while he was there. And remember, this is not a man who is a formal religious believer at all. He doesn't call himself that. He said, "I sometimes wonder where we are going. I hate to think that we struggled all those years to free ourselves from the Soviet gulag, only to live out the rest of our lives in a global shopping mall." Now that's put very graphically, but I think you know what he means. He was devastated by the thought that we were moving toward a kind of trivialization of what it means to be human. That somehow or another what we call the modern age or modernity, for all of its spectacular successes, in many ways, has failed in a very fundamental way. And we're groping, we're looking for something else. Now, I am not one of those who is anti-modern. I think the modern age has indeed brought us many gifts that I do not want to give up. The rights of the individual, the rights of press, and press freedom, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, the so-called bourgeois rights, the unshackling of scientific inquiry from its religious surveillance and control, the respect for pluralism, for different positions, for dialogue, a certain amount of trust in the efficacy of the democratic process, which is cumbersome, imperfect, slow, but we're learning to respect it as the best way to solve our problems. All of that. I don't want to give up any of those. To that extent, I am committed to the gains of modernity. At the same time, I think we all know deep down that something also has been lost, and is being lost daily, especially as the furtherance of modernity is under the auspices of a global market economy with huge international corporations and their marketing mentality, where everything is for sale. What we've lost is a certain sense of belonging to a community which is rooted in a history which gives us a sense of direction and belonging, and we're being fragmented more and more into individuals and then regrouped as market targets, sometimes according to our zip code number. We've lost something of a sense of the inherent worth of objects in nature, of other human beings, as everything becomes a commodity of human life, the earth. Now, human organs are for sale on the international market. If you have the money and you need a kidney or a heart or a lung, you can buy it. And the fact that it will have to be sold by an impoverished person from India or Turkey or Brazil, that's tough luck. That's just the way the market works. We've also lost in modernity a sense of being part of a moral tradition. to which has been handed centuries of careful thought about the deepest issues of human life. And therefore, having lost our touch with that past, we have a hard time imagining an alternative future where things can be different than just a mere extrapolation of more globalization. We've lost that sense of direction and a confidence that things could be different. And we begin to split up into pseudo-species, since we don't find that link to other human beings. So the question I think we have, the question of why have religious traditions somehow reasserted themselves is that we are turning to them in all parts of the world, sometimes desperately, as an alternative to this blind alley we call modernization, which seems to be galloping along by itself, which has a momentum in motion that seems at times unstoppable, a train that we're on and we can't seem to get off or to steer. These are resources that go back before and that hold up before us different possibilities for the future. Václav Havel said in his actual address at commencement these words, and I want to just mention these before I call on the panel, and I think it puts it very well. He said, "The relationship to the world that modernity has fostered and shaped appears now to be exhausted in its potential. The relationship is missing something. It fails to connect with the most intrinsic nature of reality and with natural human experience. It produces a state of schizophrenia. Man as the observer and man as the controller is becoming completely alienated from himself as a being. Most modern science has described the surface of things beautifully, but that is a single dimension of reality. The more dogmatic of science has treated that dimension as the only dimension, the only thing worth knowing, as the very essence of reality. And this becomes more and more misleading. We may know immeasurably more, he says, about the universe than our ancestors did. And yet, it increasingly seems they knew something more essential about it than we do. May I read that sentence again? We may know immeasurably more about the universe than our ancestors did about it. Yet increasingly it seems they knew something more essential about it than we do. And that is something that escapes us. What we have to do, I think, in our interreligious dialogue now is to listen to each other as we all confront the shadow side of our traditions, candidly, with penitence, with recognition that any religious tradition, there's no religious tradition which is perfect, but we have to mine these traditions for their memories and for their hopes, for their visions of the future, an alternative to the future that we see unfolding before us, which is so unpromising, and one in which conflict among religious traditions threatens us. These are particular traditions. There is no such thing as religion in general. There are particular religious traditions with particular histories that share some common insights but have some differences. So I want to have my last sentence here to be one drawn from my own tradition, drawn humbly, hoping that you will speak from yours, but nonetheless it's from mine, which is also built on memory and hope, on the memory of the prophets of Israel and of Jesus Christ, who continued that prophetic tradition, who promised that the reign of God was coming, had already begun in his own life and ministry, and would be fulfilled here on earth. That memory, and a hope different from the infinite extension of a consumer economy, a hope for the shalom of God, the reign of God, that as Jesus called it. This community of memory and hope, this particular one, is my community. I know as well as anyone its imperfections. I am ready to confess them, but I still commit myself to it, to the memory, the living memory that is still there in our tradition, and to the hope which will not be defeated. Thank you. Now I'd like to invite the panel to come forward. David?
Yes, I've introduced to you Professor Douglas Hicks, representing the Jepson School of Leadership Studies and ordained Presbyterian minister. Azizah al-Hibri, Professor al-Hibri is from the law school, T.C. Williams School of Law, represents the Islamic tradition, faith, and has represented the University of Richmond and the T.C. Williams School of Law on many occasions on several occasions with Bill Moyers, was with President Bush in the White House when he asked for prayer. People from different faiths following 9/11. And Dr. Cavalcanti, Professor Cavalcanti is in the sociology department, represents Taoism, and these are prepared to make some response and ask questions. We will then open the floor for you to ask questions. Azizah, would you begin, please? And you can sit at the table or come here.
Well, I don't really have a response. I do not want to respond in the sense that somebody says something and I have to say something else. What I feel like doing is to think about what I heard. And I do agree that there is a serious need for mutual candor on many of the issues we face. Let me start by saying that the kind of modern day crisis involving religion I heard Dr. Cox speak about is presented with what I consider to be a very specifically Western perspective. That is, if you're going to go to the Muslim world, you will find the analysis significantly different. But we don't have the time to do it today. What I'm trying to say is, one way for achieving understanding is to really try to know more about each other and put ourselves in the shoes of the other. And where I had tried, I'll share with you an experience that I've been thinking about a little bit. After the events of September 11, I thought that maybe I could be a bridge, somehow try to create an understanding between two points of view. But I found out that a lot of people who really came to me and said, we want to understand, were not ready to understand and did not want to hear and got angry when they found out what the other side might be thinking. That means we are too invested in our own point of view, too invested in our own project, and that we're unable to build bridges, which means that we live in a fragmented world. And when we do that, there will be an I, there will be another, and there will be conflict. And that's not good for anybody. Having said that, I do agree also with Dr. Cox that the most important thing to do is to engage in intra-faith dialogue. I'm so tired of people who stand up and talk to people of other faiths telling them how great their religion is. I mean, I know Muslims have had to stand up and say, look, Islam is great. I do believe Islam is great. But I don't feel like I have to stand up and say this to you. And I know there are some Muslims who disagree with my views. And I think that I need to talk more to them than to stand up and sort of defend my faith as if it is a property of mine, the way I defend my property. That I defend God the way I defend a property. We're somehow missing the spiritual dimension of religion. It's not about what I have is better than what you have. It's not about defending my God against your God. Let's remember, if God is who we think he is, he doesn't need us to defend him. What God needs is for us to get along. And we do not do that without understanding. And what I've been seeing recently, through the work of Jawdat Saeed, a Syrian author, who writes about violence as a mental virus that we have not noticed. We have all sorts of vaccines for other kinds of physical viruses, but the mental one escapes us in this case. I find out that the people who engage in conflict are people who have really not understood the ways of conflict resolution. They are missing a skill. And that's what we need to really focus on. And that is where I think intra-dialogue is even perhaps more important than inter-dialogue. To take care of your own and make sure that they develop the skills that are not going to reach a state of hot conflict in the world and harm others. I just would like to say that in that spirit, the Quran says, if somebody approaches you as an enemy, be kind, use a good word, and a good word is like a tree, very solid on earth, and it reaches, the branches reach out to heaven. I'm putting now two verses together, doesn't matter. And the rest of the first verse says, and if you do that, that person who was your enemy becomes your very close friend. It's kindness, it's communication, it's discussion, negotiating our differences, living with our differences, appreciating them, rather than seeing conflict and alienation and opposition. That is what is going to save the world. And that is what is in the tradition of all the prophets since Abraham and before. Thank you.
Ground so quickly and who want to say that religious tolerance is the value we should all follow. I call that position the happy pluralism position, and I appreciate him with his candor and the video to remind us that it's not so easy. Second, I want to thank him for reminding us that while we're all talking in an interfaith or intrafaith way about our differences and similarities, we might miss the fact that there's a market ideology, which he calls the God of the market in one of his articles, that may be taking over and might be the most dominant and exclusivist ideology of all when it really matters in our public life, that we're citizens first and that somehow we should be marketed, and if we can just be made docile with our religious views and others, we'll be good consumers. I appreciate him reminding us that that ideology should be part of the interfaith dialogue, if you will, as well. And third, I thank him for reminding us that another problematic position is to say that we find little fault with our own tradition, but criticize those other violent traditions. Since 9/11, and before, it's been easy to say that's Islam. They're the ones who need to get with the program and come to the table. I thank him for saying that that's also a problematic position. I want to offer one challenge and just concern, and that is when we look at individuals like Paul Hill within, say, the Christian tradition, we miss perhaps some of the other problems, people who have formal positions of authority who also use the Christian message for violence. They may be more subtle, more nuanced, but I'd like to have a conversation about how in our public life, how our civil religion, influenced so deeply by Christianity, may be justifying the massive killing of others in the name of God, in the name of the Christian God. There's a great just war and tradition. There's a discussion of Christian pacifism that we should be having that discussion. Scott Davis is in the audience. He knows more about the just war tradition than I do. But that is the kind of discussion I think we should also be having, how faith is used by formal leaders and not just individuals who are clearly on the fringes of the Christian community and other communities. And I mean that to look at, say, President Bush's use of Christian language and the Taliban's. I don't think we need to just point the finger at ourselves, but those are the kind of conversations I think we should also have and not just look at individuals who may be using religious rhetoric for violence. Finally, maybe I'll say a word. I don't want to steal Kio's point since we were chatting beforehand. There's an awful lot of certainty shared by those three individuals in the video. There's a lot of room for healthy doubt in our faith, and I think that will help our interfaith and our intra-faith dialogues. How do we know what we know? In my course, we read John Locke's letter concerning toleration, and his argument turns on his epistemological point that we aren't certain of our faith. And if we were certain that we had the truth, others who were certain they had the truth were right, then we'd all be in agreement. Someone is wrong about some of the claims in interfaith dialogue, and we should have a healthy skepticism as we think about how we should live our public life together. I know there's a complex discussion here with distinguishing between theological conceptions of truth and civic pluralism or civil pluralism. Those are all things we should talk about, but the tradition that begins with John Locke helps us at least to understand that there's a healthy room for doubt. Finally, let me just applaud Dr. Cox in the idea of looking at conflict, naming it for what it is, and avoiding the sort of happy pluralism model. I'd suggest that at least among Muslims, Jews, and Christians, we begin with a problematic text that we hold in common, and that would be Abraham willing to sacrifice his own son Isaac. Why not have intra-faith and interfaith dialogue about a difficult text like that, where someone is actually willing to commit violence against their own child for their faith and to do what they think God tells them to do? And then, that's not the end of the story. But that's a good place for me to end and for us to have that dialogue. Thanks.
Having the advantage of a few extra minutes while you were talking to make up my mind. I'm going to take this discussion from a little bit more of a sociological approach. I think there's something very important when we're talking about pluralism and respect for other people's traditions, to understand that already betrays a condition of modernity. That in some ways, modernity has introduced an element of choice that did not exist in pre-modern days. That in some ways we are, modern human beings that is, are spiritually homeless to some extent. We choose to believe. We choose to follow a tradition in ways that many pre-modern human beings did not. Religion was part of the way the world was. In some ways, Wade Clark Roof, studying the baby boomers, was one of the first sociologists to call attention to the fact that baby boomer generation is one that should be called the seekers, because they shop around, especially the Christian baby boomers, they shop around for a denomination that is convenient to their lifestyle and to their life plan. Robert Withnaw, talking about mainstream religions in America, says that we have moved from a theology of congregation or being home somewhere to a theology of journey or pilgrimage, where you no longer have the certainty of the four walls around you to define your world, and therefore you have to look for things in ways that your tradition did not have anymore. Modernity introduces the element of choice. And the problem with the element of choice is that it then transforms the spiritual world into another possible means of consuming something. One of the things that was striking me as I was watching the tape was that all of those three examples are examples of people who do not wish for choice. There is no possibility of discussion on the dark side of those traditions because choice is heretical by its very nature. There is a sense in which to question raises all kinds of possibilities about understanding what God wants for you. And so, in some ways, I think that there is a difference, but it goes beyond the intrafaith and it goes beyond the interfaith connections. I think it's learning, it's helping modern people talk to people who are operating from a pre-modern approach to tradition. And that's a lot harder. Because if you're operating from a position where there isn't a possibility of choice, and somebody else is operating from a position that there is the possibility of choice, the grounds for a common spirituality become a lot harder to define. What is acceptable? What is permissible? What is tolerable? Becomes much harder to define. I think modernity empties. In that sense, I think Professor Cox is very right in saying that we have become impoverished by being able to choose, because it means that nothing about our most important aspects of life are carved in stone. Nothing is defined in ways that allow us to take those aspects of life for granted. And when you have that much choice, then you don't have a home. And you become spiritually homeless in some ways. I think that to start a dialogue without being aware of the differences between the pre-modern and the modern is to run the risk of talk past each other. And to have conversations about very different kinds of things. It's very hard to be modern and Christian, if you're going to be honest about it. It's very hard to be modern and orthodox, if you're going to be honest about it. It's very hard to be modern in some ways and espouse certain particular understandings of Islam. Because the choices of modernity will keep undermining your need for the pure, true, unvarnished, untainted spiritual experience. When you live in a time when you can choose mates, when you can choose place of residence, when you can choose family, when you can choose work, when you can choose nationalities, when you can choose in which language to address those that are around you, it becomes a lot more difficult to be true to the requirements of a pre-modern faith. A faith that somehow has stories that were meaningful at a time when people didn't have those choices. So I think part of the conversation has to include that. And it has to include that in an honest way too. To say some of us enjoy the choices we have. Even the choices associated with the practice of our own traditions. I certainly cannot imagine practicing the tradition I grew up in the way my grandfather did. I cannot imagine practicing the tradition I grew up in with the limitations, which appear to be limitations to me, that he put up with all his life, without complaining, without that I could see any amount of bitterness about it. It would be a lot harder for me to do that and be content and spiritually satisfied. So you have to understand that we are human beings trying to practice to the best of our abilities our spirituality using pre-modern models of faith in a world that's highly modern. And that choice is going to be part of the equation one way or the other. Thank you.
Dr. Cox, would you like to respond to any of these comments, or should we open it to the floor?
I have a couple words. Just a
Good.
couple words. I do want to hear from these folks as soon as possible. Well, thank you for recognizing what I was trying to do, all three of the panelists. I think the time has passed when we can simply settle for nice feelings and warm, fluffy tolerance. I'm all for tolerance. I'm glad we've got as far as we have. I think we've reached a new stage in the interfaith dialogue. I call it the time for candor, and I think it also requires this, for many of us, much more difficult internal, intra-tradition conversation. Frankly, I have Muslim colleagues at Harvard I enjoy talking to much more than I enjoy talking to Jerry Falwell. I'd much rather talk with those Muslims anytime. Yet I feel a certain compulsion, and you might say duty, to talk and to listen to the people who represent another wing of the Christian tradition than mine, and not to read them out, because I disagree with them. Just a couple points of perhaps disagreement with the panel, which you can do with what you want. Maybe others would want to respond to. I don't quite know what it means when in the phrase, the accusation is often used, that I'm speaking from a Western point of view. And if I weren't Western, I'd look at this in a different way, without filling that out at all. Yes, I'm Western. We're all something. We're all particular. I can't jump out of my skin. But I have to say that my understanding of the crisis of modernity was also informed by people like Gandhi and people like the Dalai Lama, by the Buddhist vision of an ecological economy, and indeed informed by some of my Muslim colleagues, including Abdul Karim Saroush, who taught with us this past semester from Iran. And in some ways, I think the most interesting and challenging part of our newly enlivened conversation with the Islamic tradition is there is in that tradition a deep suspicion of whether it's possible to have a workable civilization that is in some way based on a religious foundation. Modernity defined itself as cutting loose its connection with religious. That's what modernity is. It's an experiment. It's never been done before in human history, and it's possible that it's not working. I don't think that's just a Western point of view. I'm sorry. I think there are people all over the world, thoughtful people in the various religious traditions in Asia, Middle East, elsewhere, who see it pretty much along these lines. I'm also attracted to the idea, Doug, that we look at some of these hard texts together, look at them together. I went with my wife to synagogue last week. I go with her frequently, and frankly, I wish I hadn't gone this particular week, because the Torah lesson was taken from the book of Samuel, where God is telling King Saul to kill all the Amalekites, all of them, including the women and the children and all the animals. There it is, right in our Bible. Not one of the nice verses that we like to quote. Saul kills them all, but saves a few of the animals. And God comes to Saul and says, "You didn't do what I told you to do. Therefore, my favor upon you as king is hereby retracted." Now, what do we do with that text? Do we chop it out of the Bible? We say, well, we don't do those sort of things anymore? Unfortunately, there are people who are doing those things, inspired by that same Bible. I'm not a student of the Quran, and Dr. Hibri has quoted a very nice passage. There are nice passages in the Bible, in the Old Testament, all through the New Testament. We could quote all the nice verses. But what do we do with the so-called texts of terror? Just ignore them? Pretend they're not there? Or is there some conversation we can have with each other about how we cope with these things? I'm pressing to take the next step, and I'm not going to back off into some simply pleasant evening in which we all go away agreeing with each other. I think we agree with each other on a lot, but let's keep the ball rolling. I hope you can do the same.
Thank you. Are there questions? Yes, would you go to the microphone, please? There's a microphone right in, and I think, yes, I know Azizah wants to respond, and I think you'll have an opportunity to in just a minute. But while they're coming to the microphone, this would be a good time. Do that, Azizah.
Well, I thought maybe I should explain what I mean when I say some of the analysis I'm hearing is coming from a Western perspective. And let me tell you specifically some of the things I mean. I heard comments today about, from you, Doug, how important it is to have a healthy skepticism in religion. And I agree with you. And I think this is where, in our society, we ought to move to. But I know the history of Muslim countries. And the history of Muslim countries is based precisely on a healthy skepticism in religion in medieval times. And what the Muslim world lost today is the fact that it no longer has this healthy skepticism. It is well known that traditional jurists used to say that one jurist would say about himself, I'm likely right, and my opponent may possibly be right. So the person does not think that he's absolutely right, but he puts more probability in his view than in his opponent's view. This etiquette of respect, of difference, was very common, and there are a lot of books written about it, and it is what the Muslim world lost when it became more authoritarian. How the authoritarianism came into the life of the Muslim world is a whole other analysis. But when you spoke about the new generation of seekers in the US, generations over generations of Muslims in the medieval times were seekers. It was understood that nobody need follow the school of thought of their parents, that everybody should seek that madhab or school of thought that is best suited for their beliefs, based on the Quranic verse that there is no coercion in religion. All of that was lost, by the way, in the name of modernity by the Ottoman Empire, which decided to impose a school of thought on the people. So the history of the Muslim world in many ways is different from the history of the West. And so we cannot basically do the same analysis in one quick deal. And that is why I'm pointing out the differences. What might work for our situation is probably the opposite of what needs to be done elsewhere. There are a lot of other things, but I'll leave room for others.
Thank you. Question?
I wanted to address this to Dr. Cox. I know you come from the North and you come from the Baptist tradition that cut the Southerners off. The Southerners were prohibited from appointing missionaries. The Northerners did not appoint Southerners because they had slaves to be missionaries. And so after 1845, we had the Southern Baptist Convention. And then we have complete loss of communication for many years, and it's still separate. Now, what about John Brown? When you look at Osama bin Laden and his fervor, I can't help but think of Harper's Ferry and the people that were slaughtered there. But yet John Brown supported the northern position that we should abolish slavery. Do you have any thoughts about the comparison of John Brown and Osama bin Laden?
Wow. Well, it's nice to be in Virginia. These questions are very, very alive, aren't they? I am personally a pacifist. Let me confess that right away. I would hope that in no situation would I be willing to do harm to a person, even when trying to harm me. I have been deeply shaped, very in my fiber by my having worked along with and known Martin Luther King Jr., who once said he would rather die than inflict violence on anyone else. However, I understand the just war argument. I respect it in many ways. I think there are instances in which we are called upon, if not to defend ourselves, to defend other people, or to pay the price for not doing that. And I rather believe that the situation when John Brown led his raid on Harper's Ferry was one that called for a measure of violence. Yes, I think in retrospect I would say that's true. Remember, it was the Union Army that finally captured John Brown and hanged him. It wasn't the Confederates. Although one could think of it sort of as the first battle in the Civil War. I think one has to judge this case by case and not make generalizations about it. Now, there are other people in this room, and in fact, Doug Hicks on the podium, who have studied the just war tradition much more than I have, and it is, I think, sometimes rightly extended to a kind of a just revolution doctrine, always with the same kinds of constraints, using appropriate means, limited means, with an objective that is stated in a limited way, avoiding civilian casualties and all the rest. Nonetheless, I think there are moments when that time comes, and I think perhaps John Brown's. How about one of you Southerners answering, or one of you immigrant Southerners, I don't know, about John Brown, or anybody else here? That's very interesting. I'm hoping to come back to Virginia this summer and take my 15-year-old son on a little tour of the battlefields, Antietam and Appomattox, and also Harper's Ferry. So I can use all the advice and help you can give me.
Next question, please.
Thank you. I appreciate this opportunity that this forum is providing for all of us. In a forum examining, by the way, Dr. Cox, in a forum examining religious resurgence and violence and modernity within the need for openness and candor, I am more than surprised that two topics have not been mentioned yet. One, the Holocaust of the unborn children, and two, the persecution of Christians more than at any time in world history, and the resulting martyrdom of them.
Is that a question, or?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
You said you're surprised you haven't heard these mentioned. Are you asking me a question?
I would like to hear some response to the fact that these are two primary concerns of people today, and I'd be interested in your response.
Oh, I see.
To that.
To my
I'm
response.
sorry.
Yeah, okay. No, that's a perfectly legitimate question. I just wasn't sure. I hesitate to use the word Holocaust because the word Holocaust has a particular meaning. I'm closely related to the Jewish community. I know there's a certain kind of edginess when that word is used to refer to something else. Besides, Holocaust means an offering to God, remember. The term came from the burnt offerings to God in the temple. I think it's a terrible misuse of words. I am against the killing of all human life, any human life, including unborn life. I want to be very, very clear about my position on that. I do not, however, support Paul Hill, who kills the people who perform abortions. I don't think it takes me to that position. Also, believe me, sir, I share deeply with you concern for fellow Christians in various parts of the world, including China, who are under the gun now, being persecuted. I mentioned in my talk that I'm especially interested in I'm going there late this summer, and I think it's true that they are being persecuted, more than persecuted. Some of them are being martyred in various places in the world, and that is indeed a concern. I apologize, they only gave me a certain amount of time here, and I can't cover every single topic.
Thank you. Next question.
Dr. Cox, I'm a class of 60, so I am also a non-combatant. I fell between all the drafts from World War
Yes, we did.
Remember his story about being so happy to be at that graduation because his mother always wanted him to go to Harvard.
Yes,
and I'm thinking, and I wish you would comment. I've heard so much about global consumerism and the fault of our ascending consumerism and our multinational corporations, and I think that doesn't bother me at all because of my wife and my daughter's wonderful times cruising every mall they can find in America on our travels, and it bonds them. And I was thinking, isn't our concern about trade and consumerism a paper tiger? Because if Dr. Havel went into the most if he went to the Trump Plaza in New York with his mother, I mean, they would have a wonderful time, and don't you think they would come out more bonded personally together than they would be influenced by this hedonistic consumerism they would see on every floor of that beautiful mall? And Dr. Havel, I guess he's a deist, isn't he? But wasn't his mother a very saintly religious person?
Right.
And I believe her grandchildren will be more like her than him in their religious beliefs. So I just wish you'd really tell us, are you really concerned about consumerism being this evil force? And isn't it just an extension of trade that started when Adam made a few extra error points and then started trading with the Aborigines he ran into? And I'll
Thank you. Thank
let you come.
That was Adam. Let's see. I think what I said in answer to the first part of your question is I would hope that I would remain nonviolent with reference to any attack on me. And there have been a couple of situations where I've had to do that. I am not that clear about defending the third party, whether it's, especially if it's an innocent third party. I think there are strategies other than blasting somebody with a shotgun, perhaps. There's always talk. There's always the possibility of putting your own body, if you have the courage, between the assailant and the person being attacked. There are a lot of things like that that we know about. Now, I want to turn the question about consumerism over to Doug Hicks, if I can. But with this reminder, you may have a bonding experience with your mother if you wander through the Trump Tower and you've got the money. The problem with the global consumerist culture is most of the people are condemned to window shopping. They don't have the wherewithal and will not have it, given current trends, to buy what they are told to buy, and therefore they're made to feel inadequate and pushed to the edges. It's very different. Václav Havel and his mother, I'm sure, would have had a great time in Trump Towers, but that's because they could buy something there. But I do want Doug Hicks to respond to that.
That's just like Harvey Cox to say he's going to let me answer the question as he answers the question. What are the problems with consumerism? I mean, we have to look at a number of things. I'm going to give you a few answers. One is the one that Harvey just gave you, the massive levels of inequality, and if the consumer model is one model, the citizen model is the other. In the citizen model, people get one voice, one vote. In the consumer model, people get as many votes as they have dollars, and those who don't have dollars have fewer votes in the way society is organized. 2.8 billion of those people earn less than $2 a day. So that's a real concern about inequality of power and voice and participation. Final point is it's just consumerism puts trust in those things that do not satisfy. I mean, it's a theological critique of trying to find meaning and purpose and even salvation in economic goods. And economic goods have a very important role in our lives, but they should not become the end-all and be-all. So that's the way I would begin to address the question.
Thank you. Yes, several questions here. I do want to make comment before we continue here. Dr. Cox will be sitting down for conversation in the morning between 7:15 and 8:15 in the Wilton Center next door. And we invite any of you to participate in that conversation. There will be a continental breakfast available. Yes, sir.
This is a question to Dr. Cox and the entire panel, actually. All of you spoke about discussions and dialogue and making room for that conversation regarding respect. I would just like each of you to briefly offer ideas about who is going to determine where and when we have these conversations, and who's going to be allowed to speak both in the large public scale realm and individually on a day-to-day basis within our lives.
Why don't we start with the panel responding to that, and I can think of a good answer by the time they've taken their time.
Keo, Azizah.
Great, I have to come up with something real quick. Going along with my answer, or my response to Dr. Cox, I think the problem of choice is important, not just because it allows you to have many options in life, but the problem of choice from a theological point of view is also a question of authority. If there is choice, there isn't a single authority who can call everybody together and have a nice sit down and chat. So from the point of view of modernity, one of the biggest problems of having a dialogue is precisely that there isn't a common source of authority that's going to bring everybody together who can determine how many people are going to be in, how many people are going to be able to participate, and to what extent and to what degree. All of those different traditions probably would disagree on who was going to be in and who was not, both in relationship to other faiths and in relationship to their own intra-differences. So authority is an issue here.
A very interesting question. And it's especially relevant to Muslims, because Muslims do not have a central authority. Despite of what we hear about Muslim clerics, there is no church hierarchy. And so often, Christian leaders who want to dialogue with Muslims have a problem. Who should they dialogue with? And, so they turn to some traditional sources, but that's not representative of everybody. The Muslim way is let everybody who has one way of thinking sit at the table. It sounds chaotic. When I speak about this in the US, it sounds chaotic. Like, why don't you just go and find you one guy, to represent all of you? Well, we're just really diverse within our own tradition. Okay, that's one thing. Who is going to set the place and where? This is a really important issue because the Muslim world have suffered from that with respect, for example, to the feminist movement in the West. I'm talking now about international instruments. Many of these organizations go to third world, to say Geneva or other places, tell the third world countries, come and here is the agenda. So many third world countries feel totally alienated, Muslim or otherwise, from the fact that they had no initial participation, but were called to the table after the agenda was set. This is something we need to figure out, how to have international democracy, not just internal democracy. And finally, if we're going to have dialogues, I agree with Dr. Cox. We're not going to have easy ones. I'm tired of the sugar-coated ones. There are some really important issues. If I trust you enough, then I should be able to talk to you very frankly, and you should be able to respond very frankly, and we don't have to worry about hurting each other's feelings because we're civil and we're just trying to reach, some sort of understanding between us. That kind of dialogue has not taken place, and that's what needs to happen.
Do you have a burning response you want to make, Dr.
Not burning.
Just one sentence. I think the point about the participation of women cannot be overemphasized enough. Women have, in all these traditions, really not had a place at the table. And I don't think we're going to take this next step until they have an equal voice. Also, I think this dialogue is already underway everywhere. Just walk into an urban high school in the United States, or come to our campus, I don't know about your campus, and see all of the dialogues and multilogues and trialogues that are going on among people from different religious traditions in the lunchroom, in the dormitories, in the laboratories. It's already underway. It's out of control. Nobody's setting that place. It's just happening, and will continue to happen as the pluralization of the society continues. Thank you.
Several of you are standing there, and I know it's getting late, but I do want the questions out, and we'll try to make as brief responses as possible. Yes, sir.
Okay, real quickly, to set this up quickly, Dr. Cox, in the beginning you said that the religions are different, and you're glad that they are, because if we're all the same, life would be very interesting. But can you, in there, just a quick question so I know what kind of direction you go, are you allowing that other paths can reach God? Can that be answered yes and no?
Not by me.
Okay, great.
That can be answered by God, I'm assuming, but...
Well, there you made my point. I believe there's a Quranic verse that says that God is like a candle and a lantern with many lights. And Dr. Hicks said humility and uncertainty, and on the Tao, I think the first line, Taoism is the greatest. The Tao that can be told is not the Tao. In other words, here would be my point. I think what's going on in religion is great. The seething, the searching. Even quantum mechanics has no certainty. And here we are in our quest for the absolute. And that's our hunger. We want something sugar-coated, it seems to me. And yet we are not absolute. Maybe God is, but once we speak a truth that's relative, unless we make ourselves God, and I think that's the best. What do we do about the Bible? Admit that there are things in there that we can't explain, that we're embarrassed. And then we have to deal, of course, with our constituencies that might say you're robbing us of our absolute.
I agree.
Next question.
Yes, as a friend and acquaintance of many Christian denominations, Hare Krishna, and people of Jewish faith, I was wondering, how do you move beyond, everyone keeps talking about the next step, beyond talking about religion, what do you mean by avoiding heavy tolerance and going for the next step? I'm not sure if I understand how to avoid heavy tolerance.
Well, I think that Dr. al-Hibri has said that very well. First of all, we have to have tolerance. We don't have that entirely. I'm not against tolerance. I said that before. Affirming the dignity of the other person, the other tradition, listening to it, but moving beyond the kind of candy-coated dialogue to asking some tough questions, to dealing with some embarrassing texts, to putting on the table some of the incidents in the history of my tradition, perhaps your tradition, that we would like to forget, but have been deeply offensive to other people and destructive of other people. There they are.